Hello, everybody. Welcome to another Good Governance Academy webinar. And as usual, please, the chat function is open. Let us know where you're from and where you're dialing in from. We've got 428 registrations for today's webinar. Perrin certainly pulls the numbers. Of course, not everybody is going to be able to join us, but please do. Gavin is a regular from Dubai. Thank you, Gavin, for joining us. I am just going to start the live stream on YouTube. For those of you who, perhaps don't make the itself, there is the availability to see all of the recordings on YouTube, and to also attend the YouTube live stream if you happen to be in transit and can't join the webinar. Today we have got the reactions open, so please show me you clapping. There we go. Thanks everyone. Welcome. You reactions are open. The Q&A function, please. If you have got any questions, Jenica is going to open, to facilitate the questions of Perrin. And if you can put them in the Q&A, then they don't get lost for Jenica. So that's great. But let me introduce Jenica. Jenica is our new chair of our Good Governance Research Forum. And of course, Perrin's forum that runs through the GGA, the series of webinars, lives under the Good Governance Research Forum. And in fact, Jenica was instrumental in launching our journal for the Good Governance Academy. As you can see from her banner, Wits Business School and the University of the Witwatersrand is our academic partner for the journal. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Jenica, and I'm going to enjoy watching this webinar for a change. Thanks very much, everyone.
Thank you, Caroline, and thank you for a lovely introduction. And I have the opportunity to introduce Perrin today. And many of you are very familiar with the work that Perrin's been doing for a good number of years. And CoSteer is very instrumental in developing a lot of good governance information data. So a little bit about CoSteer. CoSteer supports and advises organizations and leaders on how to develop their governance led by purpose and their humanity. They do this by utilizing technology and with decades of experience in governance and change and psychology. Really important and instrumental, I think, role in governance at this space and in this time. About Perrin, which we are very fortunate to have today, Perrin has founded CoSteer after an impressive corporate career, culminating in a number of C-suite roles and in an highly experienced professional, qualified fellow of the International Compliance Association, FICA, with a postgrad in corporate governance. He is an appointed member of the technical committee of ESG, which is Exchange Governance Group, and is passionate about changing the narrative surrounding governance and its integration with organizational culture and performance. So these are topics that are very dear to my heart, especially, and it'd be really interesting to hear more from Perrin on this and what the Good CoSteer is all about and what we are going to be looking forward to in our conversation today. So Perrin, please, over to you as you prepare to share some perspective on how CoSteer's growing data provides us with perspective and, of course, with a good grounding for where we can take our organizations to the future. Perrin, over to you. Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you, Jenica, so much. Can I ask everyone just to give me a thumbs up just to make sure you can all hear me and that everything is working, please? Lovely. Thank you so much. Many of you will know our work, and you will also understand the passion, thank you, with which we work and with which we deliver that work. And that passion is driven. And I've been on a number of GGA webinars over the last few months, and I've listened to the conversations. And without question, we're in crisis. Our Earth is in crisis. Humanity probably faces some of the biggest challenges in its history, at least the history that we can remember. And the current economic and capitalistic models that currently exist need dismantling. And that's a huge challenge. And the generations that are going to follow us need us to be courageous, us to be leaders and activists, and to form powerful movements right now. So I'm just going to ask you as a group, but asking you as an individual. Are you part of a small organization or a group, and are you endeavoring in some way to make positive change, but finding the struggle difficult? Maybe you're an individual inside an organization, and the leadership is slightly resistive, and maybe it's hugely resistive to change. And life within that organization is quite tough. Maybe you work as a consultant and your clients are desperate to change, but the pressures of the current economic climate make that so difficult that they're wavering and maybe even treading backwards. And you need encouragement. Maybe you're not in any of these particular groups, but you absolutely acknowledge the struggle, the need for change, and you really want to make a difference. But it seems like your role, your individual contribution is so insignificant. And you feel slightly despondent, and maybe you need uplifting. So if you're in any of these groups, what I want you to do is give each other a wave. Give yourselves a thumbs up. Send out red hearts. Do that right now. Just send that out to everybody, because we need to share that we are in this journey together. We're doing this collectively in all of our individual places, in everywhere that we work, and everywhere that we're trying to make change for good. Send out that emotion to each other. Thank you. And we're no different, right? In CoSteer, we face our own challenges. I don't make this call. In fact, I don't think I've ever made it, but I'm just going to make it very simply now. If you're an investor, if you're a philanthropist, if you're part of a business that thinks our work is really fascinating, please do reach out. If you're part of a university and you can see the really interesting value in the research that we're doing, and you think there's opportunities for partnership, just message me. We're open to any conversations. Why am I beginning with this right now? Well, it was Margaret Mead, the wonderful 20th century sociologist, who said, never doubt that a small group of committed people can change the world. In fact, that's the only way it's ever happened. And she called out to you, because you're part of evolutionary clusters all over the world. Small groups of people who are becoming more purposeful, more conscious, and more responsible. And I just want to extend a huge thank you to all of you. So I'm hoping my screen is now sharing. Please give me a thumbs up if you can see my PowerPoint presentation. I hope that's working. Okay, let's dive in. Thank you. So our research brings together two concepts. It brings together the idea of governance in its broad, huge, pervasive idea. And it brings together the science of complexity. So what I want to begin with is a little touch and a little reminder on what that looks like, what that is, and why we use it. I then want to dive into the role and the interplay of purpose with governance. The ISO 37000 standards put purpose right in the core of its model and its framework. Is that good? Is that right? Are the data representing that purpose is indeed at the heart of governance? And then I want to extend that observation into other interrelationships. And I want to look at how they interface with the opportunity to enhance the probability of governance development. And then I'll finish with some concluding thoughts. So, why does complexity help us in understanding governance development, and change. We may well have heard of the butterfly effect. Edward Lorenz, back in the 1970s, when he was studying weather systems, put together this wonderful metaphor that a butterfly flaps its wings in North Carolina, and we get a hurricane across Western Europe. Small changes result in a magnification of effect, which makes systems highly unpredictable and highly uncontrollable. But equally, on the other side, nature seems to be able to manage this unpredictability and uncontrollability. Look at the beautiful spectacle of starlings in the evening sky. What if we can bring these two ideas together? Change in itself is inevitable. Everything is changing. Today, tomorrow, everything has changed. But what we're seeking in organizations, what we're seeking in governance is not just change, but deliberate change. And deliberate change is not inevitable. If we look at some statistics, 65%, 70%, 90% of these types of change programs fail. That's a staggering statistic. If you take out an average then of 80%, so the likelihood is that if you're embarking on some kind of change or development change program, which is deliberate, cultural change, transformational change, digital change, growth, mergers, acquisitions, doesn't matter what it is, or you just simply want to get better at governance, the likelihood that you're going to achieve what you set out to do is about 20%. Now, that's a lot worse than even flipping a coin. And that's because, generally speaking, employees don't buy into the change, leaders don't lead the change, and no one has the foggiest clue of where they are in the change. They know they're changing because change always happens. But where are they on the journey of deliberate change? That's where we come in. What we want to see is employees participating in the change. We want to see leaders participating, being deliberate in their change, and for everyone to understand where they are in that change journey. So we can move that probability from 20% to actually better than flipping a coin, 65%. And what we need to understand is a fundamental thing. And that is that organizations are not just complicated, they're complex. Boeing engines on the left-hand side here, incredibly complicated, lots of moving parts, lots of interconnections, lots of interrelationships, lots of things dependent upon the things before it. But there's two attributes that are really critical for Boeing engines. They're highly predictable and highly controllable. Because if they weren't, we wouldn't get on a plane. Incredibly complicated, but not complex. Complex links back to our butterfly effect. Small changes can have large, unpredictable, and uncontrollable effects. That's what organizations are like. They're both complicated and complex. So this is why we need to urgently look at the performance of organizations through the lens of systems thinking. And that is why it is imperative that we look at governance through the same lens. Probably the best definition I've come across for what complexity is. But as you read it, I actually think this is probably one of the best definitions of an organization. A state of systems with a high degree of orderliness that provides stability. Yeah. Yet it also possesses flexibility and the potential for surprise. It's characterized by components that are relatively autonomous and interact in multiple ways, leading to non-linearity, randomness, and emergence. In essence, the complexity arises from the interplay of order and unpredictability within a system. And this is what an organization looks like. And this is why we have to observe organizations through the lens of complexity. We need, with some urgency, to do this. But the problem that we have is also an opportunity. Because if we can better understand the dynamics and relationships of a system, if we can better understand the governance within a system, we can participate in it more intelligently, more strategically. And this is exactly the research that we do. So let's look at what our research is saying around the role and the interplay between purpose and governance. A very quick refresh. For those of you here, you will remember, we observe governance through three interconnected elements: the decisions we make, the things we do, and the culture that pervades our group of humans. And that model goes out in 3 layers: 3, 9, 27. We observe 27 interconnected elements in organizational governance. We measure that through a validated survey instrument, looking at 2 attributes: the level of agreement and the amount of evidence that we have to support that agreement, the level of confidence in our answers. We look at 2 aspects: agreement and quality. And we bring all these data together, and we're able to place people and indices in a 2-dimensional framework where people can say, yes, we're confident that things are good around here, or we're not confident that things are good around here, or we're very confident that things aren't good around here. Different places and perspectives. This means that we can begin to look at the interrelationships between people and their perspectives around the quality of governance, and the interrelationships between the indices themselves. How is purpose interrelating with behaviors? How is the information that's available interrelating with the way in which we make decisions around that purpose? How is the way that we communicate influencing the nature of the information that moves around our organization and informs the decision-making? These aspects are all interconnected. What are those relationships? And can we participate them more intelligently? The answer is absolutely yes. So let's observe our model in a slightly different way. Here we've got the 3 attributes that are interconnected. We've got culture in the blue and the bottom there. We've got on the right-hand side in the orange, decision-making. And up in the top left there, we've got the implementation. So we've got the decide, the do, and the culture. And these 3 things are interrelated. And then on the outside of those 3, we've got 9 categories, 3 for each of our core domains. We've now got 3 domains, 9 categories. You're beginning to see the picture. So around the outside, I'm just about to show you the 27 indicators that we measure in organizational governance. Now, this isn't just a replication of our model. This is, in fact, beginning to intelligently understand the influence of each of these factors. So looking around the outside, you'll see the sector size is inferring the level of influence. The darker purple being highly influential factors on overall performance of governance. The slightly more pinky purpley, influential, but not quite so much. And those that are not coloured, still relevant, still important, but not necessarily highly influential on the system as a whole. So what does this enable us to do? Well, it enables us to strip out the middle and say, these are 27 factors that influence the quality of governance within inside any organization, any size, nature, or jurisdiction. We've got aspects like in the bottom left-hand corner, embedded, the embeddedness of purpose and values. Up near the top, we've got availability. This referring to the availability of information to support decision-making. On the far right, we've got meaningfulness, the meaningfulness of the conversion of data to information that's meaningful to support decision-making. We have an infinite amount of data, but that critical step from the translation of that data into meaningful information is highly influential on the making of meaningful, purposeful, strategic decision-making. We've got aspects down in the bottom right-hand corner. Courageous, brave leadership plays an influential role on the availability of transparent information, on ethical and emotional communication across your organization, along with its partner next to it, empathic leadership. Moving one or two to the left, we've got values-led behavior. Behaviors that are aligned with values that contribute to open, transparent, psychologically safe communication. You can see here we're building a picture of what an organization looks like. But what do these relationships look like? Do they exist? Are they multifactorial? Or are we just looking at a very static, linear organization? I think you know the answer before I show you. Embedding purpose and values impacts 18 of our 27 factors across our framework. It is highly influential. It plays a significant role in the conversion of data into meaningful information. It plays a significant role in values-led behaviors. Empathic leadership is driving values-led decision-making. Courageous leadership has a connection. The clarity of the way in which we communicate, the method and the relevance of the communication methods we choose, the nature of the emotional intelligence that exists within our own decision-making and communication supports embedding that purpose into decision-making and indeed the way we do things. There is no question in our data. We have run this repeatedly over the last 3 years. Embedding purpose in an organization is critical across many factors within an organizational governance system. You can see that these lines are of different thicknesses. I think I don't need to tell you, but I will anyway. The thickness indicates the strength of that relationship. So we see varying strengths of relationship, but nonetheless, multifaceted, interconnected relationships between embedding purpose in an organization and the outcomes of high quality governance within and across an organization. It's worth noting, move 2 up from embedded and you come to clarity. Clarity in blue. Clarity in blue there refers to clarity of purpose. Embedding purpose is 8 times more important than simply having a purpose. Our data is clear. Clarity of purpose is one of the most insignificant factors in actually achieving high levels of purpose-driven governance. Not that you don't need one. What we're saying is that having one is not important. It's the next step. It's the step from having one to living it. And the benefit of that is multiple by at least 8. And it is highly influential. But surely this isn't the only interrelationship. And you're absolutely right. There are many others. In fact, you will see those in purple on the framework. So what of some of the others? And how do they perhaps interject with embedding purpose? And can we begin to create a pattern, a way of understanding the governance system in our organization that goes beyond simply linear thinking, that goes beyond a simple framework of governance, that goes into a beautiful, interconnected, interrelational understanding of the way in which our organizations operate? And the answer is absolutely yes. On the right-hand side, meaningful information to support purposeful, strategic, goal-orientated decision-making and action. Absolutely. Highly influential, impacting 22 other factors within our framework with varying degrees of power. Meaningful information has a huge interconnection with embedding purpose, but it also has a really interesting relationship through empathic leadership, through courageous leadership, through accountability, through transparency, and indeed the availability of that information. Good governance depends upon the interconnected nature of these relationships. And it's understanding these interconnected relationships that's going to transform our governance development program. In fact, any change program, from a 20% probability to what we're seeing in our data with our clients, over 60% probability. What else are we observing? Empathic leadership, something I've spoken about before, has a huge array of impact against other aspects within an organization. It's got a really interesting relationship with embedding purpose. It's strong, it's mutual, it's exchanging. The availability, transparency, and meaningfulness of information driven by leaders that are empathic. That doesn't mean they want to be all cuddly. What it means is that they understand we're a world in crisis. They understand that people are struggling. They understand the purpose of their organization and its societal impact. They understand the importance of the well-being of humanity. And they are driven by the purpose of their organization and the needs of society. Empathic leadership is a hugely strong influencer on governance, good governance, governance for the right reasons. Okay, one step back, one breath. This looks messy. This looks like Perrin has just put a spider's web in the middle of his model. Not quite. And yes, it is a bit messy, but complexity is a bit messy. But we can unpack this. So let's see what we're looking at. I've identified 4 factors here. Embedding purpose and values, next to number 5. Accountability, next to number 3. Meaningful information, next to number 9. And availability of information, next to number 12. The numbers represent the number of influencing exchanges going between that factor and others in our framework. And it's taking the elements of maximum influence or impact. So what this means, if we look at availability, the 12 at the top, availability of information has 12 very strong relationships with aspects within our framework. Embedding purpose and values has 5. Accountability has 3. Meaningful information has 9. Now we could draw this for all of them, but we've done this for the top influencer for each of these factors. Let's distill this a bit further. This is not illustrating the magnitude of that relationship. This is only saying there is one. So let's drill this down into magnitude. Okay. Now this is looking a little less messy. Still quite messy, but it's certainly giving us a little bit of an indication. So here we're seeing the same relationships. These are the most important relationships for each individual factor drawn out between each other. But what we're now seeing is the magnitude of those relationships. And what we're beginning to see is a pattern. We're beginning to see three dominant interfaces. And here they are. Within our framework, one clear observable pattern that we're seeing is this triangular relationship. It's not the only one, but it's the one I wanted to talk about today. Unsurprisingly, it's got embedding purpose sitting on the left-hand side. And then we've got two other aspects: availability, that's the availability of information across our organizational system to make decisions and to understand feedback loops and why things work and why they don't work. And then meaningful information, this conversion of the data that pervades our organization, an infinite amount of it. But data is useless. It's the conversion of that data into meaningful information to support decision-making. That is the critical step. We are seeing a clear triangulation of relationships between embedding purpose, the availability of information, and the meaningfulness of that information to support purpose-driven decision-making. This triangle has emerged regularly in our data set. Now, this doesn't mean that we have suddenly got the silver bullet to answer our questions. What drives good governance? But what it does mean is that we can begin to participate in our organizational systems, the governance of our organizations, more intelligently, more strategically, and from a better understanding of the interrelationships that exist within our system. One more step before we move to close. And I really hope, I can't see questions, but I'm really hoping you're ready to field your questions. I'm itching to answer them. What are we seeing here? The triangle that was there before is still existent in the background. This very strong interconnected relationship between embedding purpose, the availability of information, and the conversion of it into meaningful information to support decision-making in order to steer ourselves towards that purpose. But the other relationships are not necessarily symbiotic in the same way. Some of them are showing up as more generally outputs, not exclusively, but more generally. And some are coming as more generally as inputs. So what we're trying to show you here is that there are inputs into this triangle and there are outputs from this triangle. So some of the inputs you can see: empathic leadership, as I just discussed before. Leaders that understand that our world needs them. It needs us to understand the crises that we're facing, the challenges that people have, and it needs to understand the societal impact that their organization can have on the world. That, feeding into the creation of meaningful information, drives purpose-driven organizations. Courageous leadership is impacting the availability and also, although I haven't drawn it here, the transparency of information. Courageous leadership is nurturing psychological safety. It is encouraging the availability of information to support decision-making. It is not protective. It is not siloed. It is not silent. And that is driving the production of meaningful information and decision-making to support strategic and societal purpose. And then in the green, you've got outputs. Meaningful information is driving accountability. There is a very strong output relationship between the transparency of information, the meaningfulness of information, and accountability. If we have meaningful information to support decision-making, we can accept accountability, without which we simply can't. So what we're building here, what CoSteer is building, is an understandable, patterned, interrelationship model that is showing governance as this beautiful, interconnected, interrelational system that has the power to change the world. It has the power to change organizational systems from the inside out. And the more we understand this, the more that we can understand the data that's emerging from inside real organizations. This is not data skimmed from the internet. This is real data from inside real organizations, living, breathing organizations right now. We want to develop this understanding and this knowledge, and we want to deliver it to every single organization on the planet. I'm going to draw us to a close, perhaps a few minutes early, but time for questions, I hope. So, some concluding thoughts on governance, complexity, purpose, and change. Without question, as far as we're concerned, governance is appearing as a complex system. And so we need to approach governance through the lens of complexity science, rather than compliance-based linearity. Now, that is not to critique compliance-based linearity. I get it. But if we truly want to make change, we have to begin to understand the patterns inside organizations. We've done this demonstrably over the last 3 years by showing power law relationships. Now, for those of you that have been in presentations before, you'll understand. One of the key attributes of a complex system is power law relationships. We're seeing power law relationships across governance systems. And so we can say with considerable confidence that unless your organization is measuring and improving governance through a complex systems approach, your probability of observing any real change is going to stay at 20%. It is not going to move. If you want it to move, you have to change your perspective. You have to change the lens. You have to change the way you measure. But by using a systems approach, we can change that. We can leverage the system, and in some cases, beyond 60%. And rather than seeking to drive change through a strengths and weaknesses approach, which is an approach of linearity. In fact, if we approach it through a method akin to the butterfly effect, small changes, magnified impact, we can have significant impact on organizations with reduced cost, reduced time spent, and reduced effort, getting more for an awful lot less. Why wouldn't we do that? 3 final things. Given that complex systems tend towards simple rules, look at the murmuration of starlings. Beautiful. Governance in action. What this means is that what we're identifying in our research, what we're seeing, the patterns that are emerging, these strong interrelationships could well be defining attributes of every single organization on the planet. It doesn't matter whether you're 10 people or 15,000 people. These attributes are defining, and there are many reasons why we believe this. Not enough time today to go into them. We see governance as an outcome of developmental programs and a constituent part of any developmental transformational change program. It's both an input and an output, which is absolutely vital in any complex system. It is not linear, it's cyclical. So what does this mean? What it means is we can create virtuous circles. Improve governance with an input. Governance improves. Governance continues to improve as an input and therefore improves as an output. It is a virtuous cycle. We simply need to begin and understand the patterns of those cycles. And that's exactly what we're doing. And what are we seeing in the data that I've said today? This is my short, pithy summary. By distilling these interconnected relationships, we can actually begin to determine patterns inside organizational governance systems. By embedding purpose and values into organizational governance and decision-making, this has a symbiotic relationship with the transparency and availability of meaningful information, which is driven by empathic, courageous leadership. And that is nurturing high trust cultures. And you can see by looking at this, this is a virtuous cycle. By creating high trust cultures, we increase the availability of information. We increase transparency. We increase accountability. We increase the quality of decision-making, and we become more and more aligned with our purpose. Internally, externally, socially, yes, profitability, economically. Everything becomes a beautiful murmuration of starlings inside and outside our organizations. It is not a pipe dream. It's a reality. The data is spelling it. The science accepts it. We now need to live it. Come with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Perrin. I think this has been an amazing session. The presentation for me, and I'm sure colleagues equally, the data that comes through is I think speaks for itself. And I think what you've actually explicited very clearly from the beginning is data at the heart of governance. And I think this is something that we need to really anchor our leadership on or into, and also evidence-based, governance, that governance is not just led by assumptions, that governance is actually led by data and what the rest of the organization is saying and the rest of the community and world is saying. So that for me, I thought is on point, and it's necessary, I think, for us to stop for a moment and just take this in. And I think this is the ideal opportunity for you to have presented it and reminded us that if we need to really have a history for our children and our children's children, we need to make these changes now. And it is imperative that we as individuals start this in our respective organizations. I was very curious, and I'm waiting to see, there are questions coming in, but if, I was very interested in seeing that the item of the least significance was awareness and competence. And I was a bit worried about that because I thought to myself, but don't we need to create awareness? Do we need competence? Because these are going to be the two drivers that's going to help us realize what we've been just speaking about. So maybe your thoughts while we go to the Q&A. Why the insignificance for these two areas or components?
Yeah, thank you, Jenica, and fascinating question. And I think we have to remember that what we're seeking, excuse me, are the strongest interconnections. And what we're not saying is that other aspects are necessarily unimportant.
Mm.
What we're trying to identify is the strength of interrelationships. So if we want to look at that aspect of competence, of course, we need leaders and we need people working in organizations with high levels of competence, skills, knowledge, understanding, awareness of the areas in which they work, specialties, risk management, cultural specialists, data specialists. We absolutely need that within inside organizations. And with that comes the powerful attribute of diversity, right? You know, in its broadest sense. We need a diversity of skill sets of people within inside organizations, and we need those people to be highly competent. But what we're not seeing, and you know, maybe there isn't a narrative for everything, is we're not seeing that driving the overall system of governance within an organization. We're not saying it's not an important attribute. We're not saying go out and hire a lot of unskilled people. What we're saying is if we're looking for the drivers of interconnected relationships and patterns within inside organizational systems, it's not influential on other factors. It appears to be important in itself, but it's not necessarily having an impact on multiple other factors. And of course, what I've presented today is a very much distilled version of an enormous amount of data that we have. All right.
100%.
And so I've steered the conversation towards the centricity of an ISO 37000 purpose-driven governance framework. And I'm arguing strongly that there is real data that's supporting the reason behind having a purpose-centric organizational governance system. What I'm not saying is that attributes around systems and controls, right, not coming up as influential, but clearly key in the management of risk, right? Having worked as a CRO before, I wouldn't be one dismissing systems and controls from our organizations. What I am saying is that if we want to achieve purpose-driven, societal-centric organizations, the driving features within that appear to be emerging around other attributes. Doesn't mean we ignore competence. Yeah. Absolutely. But a great question.
Yeah, I mean, you know, you've been working on this since 2022. You've probably got, you know, volumes of data, meaningful data that we could easily access. I mean, participants have the opportunity to engage with you right now and, you know, get in touch with you and source out the data and get meaning from that and see how that data makes sense for their own organizations. And I think this is a very powerful opportunity that we have right now. But I do not want to take away all of your time. I see there's a question, and I'm just going to read from the Q&A. It says, how do you forge a paradigm shift in a capitalistic world so that we ultimately get empathetic leaders who think about the resources, people, the environment, and instead of pure profits at the cost of the above? I mean, this is a very heavy question.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts?
My thoughts. We have many conversations, obviously, with leaders who are curious about the work that we're doing. And I think one of the reasons for saying what I said at the beginning was that we are facing a world where this paradigm shift for many is obvious, but for many is terrifying. We live in a world that has been forged really over the last 200, 300 years, you know, with an imperialistic, capitalistic, well, patriarchal driven culture. And therefore we absolutely need evolutionary clusters of people all over the world forging this message ahead. How do you do it? You do it with absolute compassion. You do it with curiosity. You listen. You speak much less. And if you hear and you truly listen to some of these leaders, inside their rhetoric is in fact the desire to move. But they're terrified. And what we do with our partners and our organizations is we hold them. We hold them in that space. And we say, look at what we can do for you. And we can put it in financial numbers sometimes. We can say, you're about to spend £100,000 on this transformational project. The likelihood that it will succeed is about 20%. Yeah. what if we could change that to 60 and reduce your spend to 50,000? And they're like, what? I'm going, let us hold you, compassionately hold you. Let us show you how we do it, and let us walk with you. It is about holding people. It is about being compassionate towards their perspectives.
Yeah.
They themselves are held in fear. Let's break down that fear. Yeah.
These two important things. I like the point on the evolutionary cluster that's right on the top. And, I think also going to a more compassionate type of governance where we can take the learnings from the data you've gathered and actually assist leaders to make better decisions. That takes me to one of the other questions that we've got on our Q&A. And the question goes, how does the tone at the top help in purpose and value driving governance? So I think that is, I think on everybody's mind right now, if we want to make this shift, we want to make this change, how do we get the cluster on the top, so to speak, to become evolutionary?
Yeah. And I don't want to repeat what I said before, so I'll try and come at it at a different angle. The leaderships that we work with often approach us because there's an acknowledgement or there's a necessity that something is not quite right. It might be that they've tried to change project and it hasn't worked. It might be that they're undergoing a challenge because of regulatory action and demonstrating governance or undertaking a board effectiveness process is required. Or it might simply be that, and it's far less frequent, that they're actually purpose-driven organizations that are seeking us. Generally speaking, they aren't. And what we do is we take them on a journey of showing them the strength of the relationships between purpose and organizational performance. And once you begin to demonstrate the impact that being aligned with a purpose internally and externally. So purposes should be internal. Yes, so there's a purpose for the organization existing internally, and that might be multiple, but there's an exchange going on between that organization and its society, global, local, however it works. And understanding that symbiotic relationship and the dependency, the interdependencies of that organization and its society. If you can begin to dismantle that through curiosity and compassion with leaders, what you find is that they understand, well, our organization is dependent upon the market, so our organization is dependent upon our suppliers, or our organization is dependent upon our customers. Absolutely, because it's an independent relationship. These are interdependent relationships. And therefore, purpose becomes critical in terms of understanding those interdependencies. And this is when purpose can be internal, inwardly facing, and that's important. Goal setting, strategic plans, operational plans, strategic change, all really important, internal. But then there's outward looking, there's the external, equally valid. So coming back to your question, Samuel, how does the tone at top? Without question, it's absolutely influential. And how do you influence that? You influence that through listening to them, understanding them, and reflecting back to them how their perspective is in fact no different to yours. It's just that your lens is different. That's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Perrin. I think you are reminding us about the humanity in leadership and how we can, access that. We all have this, and this is something that's not new to us as individuals, but it's just honing in on our humanity and aligning that with what we've just heard this afternoon. And I think, maybe colleagues are thinking this, and I certainly am. What would some of the, a person who's just heard your session right now, motivated by you, has had this at the back of their mind, wants to action this, but maybe is a bit, fearful in the types of decisions to make. What would be some of the early steps for such an individual?
I mean, obviously, we very much hold the hands of people and organizations who wish to go through this process. But if I kind of take a step back and I take CoSteer as an individual organization out of it, I think the first steps towards this is to have communications and bring in others to support that communication. So organizations like CoSteer, who can partner with you in order to see this transformational change begin inside your organization. And it's why I said at the beginning, you know, we often find ourselves, especially if we're endeavoring to seek deliberate change in the current social and economic climate, we feel we're standing alone, but we're not. And so seek someone to support you from the outside. Work with that person, with that group, with that organization, and begin having a conversation internally with people that I would call your pathfinders. There's a wonderful expression that I learned from Seth Godin, and he says, those, what is it now? You see, those that are, oh, I can't remember now. Goodness, there you go, it's gone. Those that are pathfinders for others. Those that, anyway, it's gone. What I'm trying to say is that essentially, if you're seeking to make a difference, if you're seeking to go out there, it's those that are courageous. It's those that who have the willingness to step just one step forwards. Those are the pathfinders within your organization. Seek out those people. Seek out the people that might be willing to just take that one step forwards with you. This isn't about a giant leap. This isn't about jumping into oblivion and just hoping you're going to survive and not drown. This is about taking collective steps, small steps together in clusters of people. So just find those people, walk one step forwards, then look around and say, we're still here, look. We haven't disappeared. Take another step forwards. Yeah.
I think those are beautiful parting thoughts in Perrin. I think, you know, holding one another's hand figuratively and finding like-minded individuals that are going to take this journey with you and take those little steps, but positive steps in making a better world and making a better, you know, workplace. There are many individuals that these ideas and that hold dear to them, that anchor with them. And how do we make that a reality for them? And I think this is quite sobering, and I think, you know, sets a good seed that we start to think about this as we go our way, as we're almost on time now. And I think you've got some great comments that have come into the chat, great appreciation, requests for the slides, and just for the work that you are doing, what CoSteer does, and the insights that you bring into these sessions. I think there's much appreciation amongst participants on this, and we are appreciative of this as well. So I'm going to hand over to Evelyn. Evelyn, for your thoughts as we bring this to a close. But Perrin, before we go, any final thoughts on your side? I mean, any thoughts that you would love to leave participants with as we approach close?
Thank you, Jenica. Just a huge sense of gratitude on my part. It's always an absolute pleasure to come on here and speak and share the work that we're doing. I know and I feel the struggle that we feel on a day-by-day basis, and it always feels like an incredibly welcomely and homely place to come, and so really just extending my gratitude to everybody that comes along. I think we've got quite a number of people here today, and I know many people that will watch this back. So just a huge amount of gratitude and thanks to all of you for being here, for supporting our work, and yeah, thank you.
Well, thank you, Perrin, from GGA. Evelyn, I hand over to you. Any thoughts on?
I just want to say a big thank you to Perrin for presenting to us today. And I think really touching on an important aspect of the work is it's the human connection. that I think we all get lost through. I think especially in these times, it's important to know that we have the network, we have the resources, and coming together, there's a lot that can still be achieved. So thank you everyone for joining us. Please feel free to go through the GGA website. We have tons of events coming up discussing on various things such as AI. And I think it's really important, especially in these times, for us to stay together as a community, understand the struggles, and stay in contact. So we encourage you, reach out to Perrin, engage, and we thank you all for your time today. And we hope you have a wonderful week forward. Thank you, everyone.
Indeed. Thank you, everyone. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.